Welcome back. As a Bronx-born, trauma-informed yoga teacher and wellness practitioner, Samantha Ortiz is on a mission to help equip Bronx residents with practical tools for stress reduction, emotional regulation, and overall well-being. Samantha is a trauma-informed yoga teacher and mindfulness educator. She joins us now to maybe teach us all a little bit more about how we can use yoga to help us in our everyday lives. Nice to have you with us, Samantha.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, trauma-informed, what does that mean? I suppose we're all trauma-informed because we all live in this difficult world, but
Sure.
is that what it means?
Yes, so trauma-informed yoga has a strong emphasis on invitational language. And what that means is being mindful of the words that we're using to guide someone in and out of a pose. And
Out of a pose?
Out of a pose, out of a posture, a yoga pose,
I see.
a yoga
Okay.
posture, yes. So there are ways that we can cue someone so they can have a sense of safety in their bodies. And so that mindfulness, again, around the language can allow someone to feel like the yoga mat in our time together is an opportunity for them to explore themselves in a way that is a safe container.
I'm going back to that word trauma because it's
Sure.
such a strong word.
It is.
I suppose we all have it. Don't start asking me about the stuff I'm dealing with outside the studio here. But we're all dealing with trauma. Is it everyday trauma that we're talking about?
Everyday trauma, I mean, it's a spectrum. There's some trauma and people have been through a lot in terms of abuse. And then you have other forms of trauma that you've been perhaps exposed to in your community. So it really does run the gamut in terms of that spectrum. And so that's why, again, the invitational language is really important. And so my approach is to encourage people to have this level of curiosity when it comes to their bodies and what they're experiencing, and to honor it, right? Their practice is personal. No two practices look the same. And so with that approach, I think it can be really helpful when we're talking about healing and using yoga as a tool for healing.
In the borough of the Bronx, and we know what our borough is like, you are from the Bronx.
Yes,
This is particularly relevant to people in the Bronx.
absolutely.
And why so?
So like you mentioned, there, and especially from my experience, so I can speak personally, but having all of this anxiety, being a first-generation college student is when it really first started to trigger and happen for me. And
Because
so,
of all the pressures of being a first-year college student.
Exactly, which I think a lot of people in my community can relate to, right? Being first-gen and navigating new spaces, imposter syndrome. I mean, it's so layered. And so when I took my first yoga class, although I had such an amazing experience and I noticed the difference, I wasn't living in this space of anxiety anymore because I was like, okay, I had this first yoga class and I was able to see that there's another way to operate and move through the world. So I had that sort of benchmark to compare, but I didn't think that it was something I could really practice because I sought it outside of my community. So I think it's really important to bring these tools to the Bronx.
That's why you're bringing
and that's why I'm bringing it here as well.
One of the other things which has been put into our notes is that it's used for a tool for social justice in marginalized communities. I was trying to get my head around what that meant.
Yes.
How can it be used for social justice? I understand the personal development, the personal dealing with trauma, but now we're talking about a much larger effect of this. Just describe that if you would.
Sure, happy to. So yes, yoga offers liberation individually, right? We're doing a lot of self-exploration on the mat. But there's something in yoga philosophy called the yamas and the niyamas. And they're essentially ethical guidelines on how to operate and move through the world individually and collectively in relationship to other people. And so through the yamas and the niyamas, we see that we're all interconnected and that this divide in our differences are not as wide as we may think, seemingly. So through that lens, when we decide to heal, which is radical in and of itself when we're talking about systems of oppression, how we show up in the world also makes up our collective society. And when we do so in community, there's strength in numbers and in holding space for each other. So again, it's that interconnectedness that yoga philosophy offers that I think can really be helpful when we're talking about yoga and social justice.
And so it certainly it makes sense because if you can educate each individual, you can get there.
Exactly.
Do you ever say to yourself, gee whiz, I look at a group of people, we have people in the studio here, I look at people here, what the world would look like if all of them went through this kind of process, that you do with your yoga teaching?
I do. I think
You do think that?
everyone. I do think that.
I was
think
just guessing.
everyone should. No, absolutely. I think yoga is about self-study. It's about binding our mind, body, and spirit, right? And so if everyone engages in self-study while they're on the mat, I think it just allows us to move through the world with more compassion, more self-compassion, and again, view each other in this interconnectedness. I mean, it's all about discovering what works for you, feeling resourced, connecting to your breath, navigating how to regulate your nervous system. It's all about self-study, mind, body, and spirit.
I've never done it, let's be very clear, but when you see it and you see it on TV or you see demonstrations or ads or whatever else,
Yes.
there seems to be a physical thing involved. I mean, I'm not doing any of the right movements. How much of it is physical in terms of being able to get where you would like people to get? And how much of it is mental? And then, of course, the second part to that question is, does that mean everybody can do it? Or, do you have to kind of be flexible or whatever it is that you need to be?
So there is a stereotype that a yogi is supposed to look thin and be super flexible. That is not true at all. Yoga is for everybody. And it is about using the physical postures in order to reach this state of mindfulness, yes. But there is a spiritual element to it that comes with connecting to the breath, with mantras and affirmations. So it isn't about achieving a perfect posture or a perfect pose. It's the person that you're becoming as you're learning proper alignment, as you're in these postures, navigating pain versus discomfort. It's the journey to the posture that really develops someone into who they want to be during their time on the mat. So there is no perfect posture.
Have you seen people change, like actually change? In other words, they take a class or a couple of classes, and we can talk about what the system is like, but then you see them, what they were like when they came in, and then as people, how they were afterwards.
Absolutely. So I've noticed people feeling guarded, anxious, and doubting themselves on the mat. And you can see it. They're sort of like second guessing if they're doing it right. They're looking around. And then I've noticed
and they're looking at other people.
Okay. They're like, am I in this
I
pose
get
the right way? And I've done it myself as well. So I've noticed that people develop a sense of safety within their bodies. They're more confident. They leave and they're more at ease. And it's just a practice. They come back and they are making incremental changes. And some days, if a child's pose is all the person has the capacity to do, which is, stay in child's pose the whole class, then that's just what they have.
That word?
Child's pose.
Child's pose.
Yes, it's a more, it's like an anchor pose where they're sitting on the mat with their knees are bent, their knees are open, and they're having like a more inward focus.
All of a sudden, I want to feel like I want to try it.
It'll be a hard pose in this chair.
Yes.
But I encourage people, if you don't know what child's pose is, to look it up themselves, because it'll be hard to also demonstrate here. But essentially,
well, we could. We got to throw everything out of the way. But, yeah.
But it's about honoring the capacity that they have at the moment.
So, somebody who takes a class or a course with you, do they do it once a day, once a week, and then do you give them homework, do it at home? In a way, it's like a fitness class or an aerobics class. You always want people to stay active. So talk about kind of the routine that somebody who wants to learn about this needs to engage.
Sure. So my approach is to ground into your body. So we do that with breath work and mindfulness, just checking in with the natural rhythm of your breath and seeing where you are in that moment. And then from there, we just dial up the volume even more into your body. And so we make intuitive movements. We get a little bit playful and curious, honoring your body and where it's at. And then from there, my classes, the approach is really centered on self-compassion. So again, honoring where you are. It's okay if your body cannot do a certain posture, right? So that's my approach. And when people want to take classes, that's what they can expect.
This is the second segment in a row that we had somebody use the word compassion, and I like that. I couldn't help but notice. Talk to me about this whole idea about BIPOC, B-I-P-O-C yoga. What is that, and where does it fit into the dialogue that we've had?
Sure. So BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, People of Color communities, essentially. And so this fits into this because there is a narrative, and I also bought into it at one point as well, that yoga is only for a certain demographic and a certain group of people. But yoga is really for everyone. And so I'm amplifying the voices of BIPOC wellness practitioners, we can allow people to feel like they can see themselves in their practice. And it's really about representation.
And this is what goes back to what we were talking about how it being particularly appropriate for the people of the Bronx.
Yes.
What are the kinds of commitments people have to make to doing it? Like you say, okay, you know, my friend brought me and I'm going to try it out, but then, you know, can you kind of do it halfway? Can you get into it eventually? Or do you have to hear what Samantha is telling us right now and say, all right, I'm in, I'm all in, and then you just have to change the way you are? You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
Is it a gradual development, or is it more like, all right, now I'm going to do it and I'll walk out of here and I'll feel better?
Well, everyone's journey and practice is different. Just from my personal experience, I took my first class in 2018, loved it, didn't think I could do it. And so I was the only person of color in the room, and that really affected my experience. So I decided that I couldn't do it again. And so I didn't pick up a yoga mat, or buy one rather, until 2020. And then I started to have a personal practice in the comfort of my home. And of course, that was during the pandemic. So even more heightened sense of anxiety. So it's a journey, it's lifelong. Sometimes you can have a practice that's more consistent than other days, but that is okay. It's the commitment to returning back to yourself.
I probably should have asked you this. We're almost out of time. What captivated you? First of all, what made you do it in the beginning? And then ultimately, what made you say, you know, there's something here?
Yes. So I have been living with high functioning anxiety. And so, again, going back to that first generation pressure and anxiousness moving through the world. So what made me want to practice it was the fact that I was able to soothe my anxiety through yoga. And I thought to myself, I have something here.
You know, you say that, I'm going, you know what?
Yes.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yes.
Samantha Ortiz, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So folks, to learn more about Samantha, please visit her website. We put it on the screen below. And we appreciate your time. Stay tuned. We'll do more open right after this.